Okay.
So welcome, friends. We are moving on with our study. Charles, good to see you.
Oh, I'm glad to be back. The last 2 weeks was very active. I couldn't make them. These meetings, I missed it.
We're glad to have Nancy in person, and she even got to eat some rugelach and
and have some
coffee. So
we invite you all to come.
Invite you all to have some rugelach and come schmooze, and then we're continuing our study, and we're moving forward in time. Just a little bit of background that thus far all the rabbis we've been studying are considered. This is the yeshiva term, are considered Tanaim, and that's Tanaim, and they're the first generation of rabbis. Whatever they said was like golden. It was preserved as having a lot of authority, and so later generations. Let's say you said, well, I heard that we do Havdalah when there are only 2 stars out, and somebody says, wait a second, I've got a teaching from one of the Tanaim that says you have to wait until there's 3 stars. And if you have a teaching from one of the Tanaim, that will trump any of the other teachings from a later generation. So that whole, when you're in yeshiva, you're made to memorize all the Tanaim, all these teachers, and so. But now the last rabbi we studied was Judah the Nasi, who compiled the Mishnah, and that ended the generation of the Tanaim. And now we begin to read the generation of the Amoraim. And these are the people who came afterwards and said, well, we like what came before, but we're going to start to pick holes in their arguments and do that typical Jewish thing of Amoraim, Amoraim. And they're the next generations. And what started to happen with the Amoraim is this level, you started to have rabbis in Babylon, so in present-day Iraq, who would travel to Israel and travel back, and they started their own study hall. So you started to have these 2 centers of power. And the rabbis in Babylon, it's not far from what we're going to study today, that the direct transmission of lineage was lost. So before then, how did you make a rabbi? You put the hands on the head, right? And that's how you made a rabbi. And like you're transmitting the spirit, and they believed it went all the way back to Moses. And that's what gave you the ability to be called a rabbi. But then what happened, at a certain moment, that lineage was lost. And so they no longer had a person who did that. So not far from now, people are no longer called rabbi, they're called a rav. And so actually, you'll see that in there's a few generations where they're called rabbi, but then they're no longer called rabbi, they're all called rav.
Why is that?
Because they no longer had the direct lineage. And so they were pseudo rabbis, they even weren't rabbis. So even these days, even though we call ourselves rabbi, we're really not. We've lost. Although I know, when I became a rabbi, it was like a graduation, and they tried to make it holy and special, but it was a celebration. But I know my great uncle, who was a rabbi, a famous rabbi, when he became a rabbi, was Rav Hunter, who was one of the great early leaders of Judaism, ultra-Orthodox Judaism in America. Said to him, I think you're ready. And he lit a candle, and he put his hands on his head, and he said, now you're a rabbi.
Whoa.
That's how he did it. So that was how they did it back then. So when I became a rabbi, before I had my big graduation in front of thousands of people, blah, 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 my father and one of my teachers, Reb Mimi Feigelson, she's the world's first female Orthodox rabbi, they went with me to a place in Los Angeles, next to the sea. They put their hands on my head, and they gave me my own little private smicha ceremony.
That's nice.
Which was sweet.
So you did have hands laid on.
So I did have hands laid on,
So
but
it's
not. Yeah, I don't know.
It's not direct.
I feel it's direct in a different direct way, but that's my own personal.
But that felt good.
That felt good. But that's part of what we see here. So when you read the actual Talmud, not the Mishnah, which you'll sometimes have, especially when you're quoting. So the Talmud, a lot of the discussions took place hundreds of years after this in Babylonia, in huge yeshivas, the first big yeshivas, and someone would say, let's say they're discussing again Havdalah, like, okay, what kind of spices are ideal for doing Havdalah? And someone say, I have a tradition, a name of this person, 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 going all the way back to some of the rabbis will study today, because those are always in the name of Amoraim usually, and that gives what you're saying some authority. You just say, hey, in those days, if you say, I just have something, I think we should use cinnamon. Say, well, who are you? So you have to back it up with some lineage of authority. And that's kind of there's a period of about 300 to 500 years where Jewish custom is being consolidated, and it's consolidated by arguing and bringing the authority of different rabbis and different transmissions and different traditions that you have. And of course, they didn't have as much written down, so a lot of it is through memories. You say, well, I remember I once heard from my teacher, and then you memorize, and he said he heard it from his teacher, heard it from his teacher, heard it from his teacher, all the way back.
That's like the telephone game,
Like the
right?
telephone game, because sometimes things get a little bit
Lost in the
lost in the translation, and so at this time we have this beginning of a two different traditions. So the rabbi that we're going to be, the main rabbi, we're going to be studying about two rabbis because they came in pairs and they have a famous friendship. But Rabbi Yochanan, he's credited with
It's a rabbi, not a rebbe.
he's still a rabbi. He's still one of the last rabbis, and he's credited with having been one of the main forces behind the Jerusalem Talmud. So that might be, I'm not sure how scholars feel about that because it's a little bit early. But his opinions come up in thousands of times in the Talmud, and we're going to be studying about his famous. He was a student of Yehuda the Nasi that we studied about last time, though he was only 15 when Yehuda the Nasi died. So he studied with a lot of his students. Anyhow, he had one of his students who became more his partner than his student was a gladiator, and that's Resh Lakish. And so he was a former gladiator, and so they had this really powerful partnership. So we're going to be reading about them and a very beautiful story. Anybody have any thoughts or questions or anything before we begin? Okay.
I just want to make a comment, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
I'll tell you one thing that I think this whole tradition of writing down and passing on interpretation and knowledge provides such clarity and wealth to spiritual knowledge. I can tell you just from the Christian world, there's a whole mishmash, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but there is a tradition where there isn't that in the background, and so everything is constantly open for interpretation and reinterpretation and misinterpretation. And so I find this wealth because I know in Judaism there are various groups, and that sort of thing, but you have this wealth of knowledge and wealth of interpretation from intelligent and spiritual and smart people, that it kind of keeps everybody on the same page, so to speak. And I just wanted to throw that comment in. I just find this really a gift from the forefathers.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, one aspect of that I think is really interesting is that it keeps people honest because you saying where your information comes from, and you have to cite. If you don't, and there's a whole tradition. Even I was taught this, when I was studying. If you don't study where your tradition comes from, it's a very big sin. So if you heard a piece of Torah, a little teaching, you always have to cite where it comes from. unless you have the permission of that person not to. But that's considered a really important value, both to honor the person, but also so people know where things are coming from. But what it does is also gives a lot of flexibility. So in our conservative movement, there's sometimes we've looked back at issues, for example, the place of women in Judaism, and for thousands of years, women did not have much of a place in terms of ritual stuff and in the synagogue. And so when people start to look, okay, how can we find justification within the tradition to open it up? There's literally thousands of teachings that were never became the teaching, but that were there on the side that you could then turn to twist and to make different rulings and to keep it as keep it alive. So it gives you a lot of room to make different decisions. And even if the stream went left, you can go back and say, well, you know what, our historical circumstances are different. And one of the things with women is it would have been considered to be dishonorable to the congregation to have a woman read Torah, because that was the cultural reality of their time. So
Not so long ago in this synagogue.
and not so long ago in this synagogue, but now we live in a world where that's ridiculous. So
Yeah.
you can go back to that original decision thousands of years ago and say, we can trace that decision and say that wasn't a matter of something being holy and sacred, it was just a cultural context. Here's another rabbi who said, well, I don't think that, let's just follow him. Or, so that gives us, or we can say that, Bruria, we didn't study much about her, but she and her husband were of the first generation of Tanaim. She wore tefillin. So if she wore tefillin, why can't women wear tefillin now? And so, so that you can go back and do that. Well, in the Orthodox tradition, they say, well, we can't go back that far. In the conservative world, we go back and we're willing to change the flow. So it brings a lot of flexibility. And it's not just saying, hey, I'm just changing everything out of the blue, but I'm backing it up in thousands of years of
I can cite tradition.
Yeah, I can cite
I can cite
tradition.
a tradition.
A tradition.
So I want to ask you a question, how
Sure.
my mind works. It just
Sure.
popped into my head when you were talking about,
Yeah,
laying hands on.
sure,
Maybe that's where Jesus got that from,
sure.
is because
Yeah,
he was considered
he was a rabbi.
a rabbi, right?
was a
And he
rabbi.
was a nice Jewish
Yeah.
boy.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, and he
No,
laid
he's-
hands on people to cure them of certain things.
Yeah. Well, there's something very powerful about putting your hands on a
Yeah.
person's head.
Oh.
It's a very, right, it's
Oh, absolutely.
a power. We bless our children that way, right?
That's right.
We bless the
And I
children.
can't believe that Jesus was the first one.
Yes, but you're talking about cultures. Are you reflecting, you say orthodoxy, reflecting the culture of Eastern Europe? Rather, we have different cultures in our stream of beliefs, and it may be
Yeah.
different because
Yeah,
my memory, my visits to Spain, and we go to some places, there were many women that were respected as very scholarly, and while in the, shall I say, the golden age in Spain and Sepharad. So
In general, the more open the society, the more the women had a place, right? The more, and so this is a bit of a side note. So in the times of the Torah, obviously it was a very patriarchal society, but the matriarchs are pretty powerful too. I mean, the matriarchs, God says to Sarah, listen to your husband, says to Abraham, listen to your wife, right? And Isaac's wife outsmarts Isaac to give it to Jacob. And, so there is, the matriarchs of Judaism have a lot of power too, even though they're living in a very patriarchal world. And part of that was, it was just for safety, right? There was no police back in those days. And, men were the ones who did war. And so women needed men to protect them from the chaos, the reign, the lawlessness. And so even the ketubah, right? The ketubah, which these days is considered to be an antiquated and not very feminist document at its time, was very cutting edge because it said that women were allowed to, first of all, divorce was permitted, which gave women a way out of an abusive relationship. and they would get something for leaving. They weren't just left destitute when they left. So there are a lot, Rabbinic Judaism, which is actually, there's a lot of things in the Talmud which are horrific towards women when you read them. I mean, there's stuff about, marrying out a 3-year-old and these things that are, and descriptions of things that are, don't want to repeat it in polite society, but at the time it was all meant to try and protect, and from there limited understanding, and so you can take that spirit and move it forward to this day. So there's something very right. The Torah tradition was very much, we do literally what it says in the Torah. And the rabbis, as we can see, they were very alive with traditions, and sometimes they say, well, I've got this tradition, but sometimes you wonder, didn't they just make it up? And so there's a lot of stuff going on here that was very creative at this moment of time. And as we've been seeing, right, they would make rulings which were very lenient to open it up, because they were really concerned with Judaism being flexible enough to survive exile. And to survive exile, you can't have something that's just very rigid, or it just doesn't work. So let's move forward. Let's read a little bit. We're on page 279 in our reading. We're Rabbi Yochanan, Resh Lakish. We're just going to do a few readings just to become acquainted with Rabbi Yochanan. Unless someone has another comment, Phil, go ahead.
I was just going to say good morning. That's all. I'm happy to read if you like.
I feel.
I could
Good
read if you
morning.
want.
Thank you. All right, Norma, let's do 398. We're just going to read a few to get acquainted with Rabbi Yochanan.
398.
Right as well.
Okay, there was a woman with child who inhaled the smell of food on the Day of Atonement and was seized with a craving to eat. People came before Rabbi to question him whether food might be served to her. He replied, "Go and whisper in her ear that it is a Day of Atonement." They whispered it to her, and she instantly overcame her craving. Rabbi applied to the unborn child the verse, "Before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee." From that woman issued Rabbi Yochanan.
Okay. Saying he's a little
Wait,
bit
is
of
he
a holy
Rav or Rabbi?
rabbi. He's rabbi. He's still rabbi.
Okay.
He's a few more generations
Rabbi.
of rabbi.
Okay, all right.
But at this point, the rabbis in Israel are still rabbi, but the rabbis in Babylonia have now become rab at this point. Go
Look
ahead.
how good the power of suggestion is. Rabbi Yochanan, when his mother conceived him, his father died. When his mother gave birth to him, she died. Oh, God. Rabbi Yochanan said, "Once as I rode on my grandfather's shoulder, I heard Rabbi Simeon Bel Eliezer reciting the lore of Torah as he sat in his teacher's chair." Rabbi Yochanan said, Rabbi Oshia Barabi had 12 disciples. During the 18 days I spent among them, I came to know the intellectual capacity and wisdom of every one of them. Rabbi Yochanan also said, when we were studying Torah in Rabbi Oshia's home, 4 of us used to sit in the space of 1 cubit.
So we're
Oh
just
my,
How big is a cubit?
it's tiny.
Tiny,
They're
right?
back to back.
it's telling us he comes from a special spiritual kind of birth, right? And he studied he was totally immersed in it, and it wasn't always easy. Why were they in a small space? Because they couldn't afford to be in a bigger
Big
house.
space.
They spent their time studying, not making money. So this is a Rabbi Judah Nasi who was eating luxurious foods of Caesar, right? So, all right, let's continue.
Rabbi Yochanan said, I am the only one remaining of Jerusalem's men of outstanding beauty. Let him who wishes to perceive Rabbi Yochanan's beauty take a silver goblet as it emerges from the silversmith's, fill it with the seeds of red pomegranates, encircle its brim with a garland of red roses, and set it between the sun and the shade. Its lustrous glow will be an approximation of Rabbi Yochanan's beauty. Whoa, this guy likes himself. Huh?
Oh, It's said, yeah, well, he had this reputation for being
Handsome.
very handsome and very corpulent.
Yeah.
Let's only do one more of his, and then we're
Okay,
gonna,
Rabbi Yochanan
let's,
felt
not that
ill.
one, let's go to 406.
Oh, 6? Okay.
No, it is-
He's corpulent, he's very handsome, yes, and he knows a lot of Torah. And his teaching spread all throughout the land. He had so many disciples. Go ahead.
A story is told of when Rabbi Yochanan was taking a walk up from Tiberias to Sepphoris, leaning on the shoulder of his disciple, Rabbi Haya bar Abba, when they came to a certain farm. Rabbi Yochanan said, "You see this farm? It had been mine and I sold it because I wanted to devote myself entirely to the study of Torah." When they came to an olive orchard, Rabbi Yochanan said, "You see this olive orchard? It had been mine and I sold it because I wanted to devote myself entirely to the study of Torah." When they came to a vineyard, Rabbi Yochanan said, "You see this vineyard? It had been mine and I sold it because I wanted to devote myself entirely to the study of Torah." Then Rabbi Haya began to weep. Rabbi Yochanan asked, "Why are you weeping?" His companion replied, "I weep because you did not put anything aside for your old age." Rabbi Yochanan said, "Haya, my son, is what I did really as foolish as you seem to think? I gave up something that took more than 6 days to be created and acquired, something that took 40 days and 40 nights to be revealed. For it took God no more than 6 days to create the entire world, as it is written. In 6 days, the Lord made heaven and earth, Exodus 31:17. But to reveal the Torah took him 40 days and 40 nights, as it is written. And Moses was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. Well, he sounds a little bitter there.
Yes, right, he's made sacrifices for, okay, let's go to page 282. And number 419. Should we do the one just before? Oh, let's put that one. We might go back afterwards. Okay, let's do 419.
When Resh Lakish sold himself a good sum to the Lydians, he took along a water skin with a stone in it, because he said, "I have heard that on the last day before combat in the
He's
arena,
a gladiator, yeah.
they grant any request the gladiator may make in order that his blood may be sweet, that he may face combat with his mind at ease." On the last day when they asked him, "What would you like?" he replied, "I want you to let me tie your arms, set you down, and give each of you a blow and a half with this water skin." He then bound them and seated them. As each of them received a blow and was stunned, each grimaced and gnashed his teeth. Resh Lakish said, "Are you laughing at me? Remember, you still have half a blow coming." Then he killed them all. Thus he procured his freedom. Later, as he sat on the ground eating and drinking, his daughter asked, "Don't you want something to recline on?" He replied, "Daughter, my belly is my cushion." Having been fond of spice food, he left at the time of his death a cob of saffron, thus applying to himself the verse, "And they shall leave to others their substance."
So
That's a very expensive,
it's a lot of,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
it's very expensive.
Here, I think they get the strange story, that one, right? Resh
Very.
Lakish, but it's one of the only stories we have of Resh Lakish from before what we're going to read.
But it also explains, because when it explains how he managed to escape the
Right.
Yeah,
gladiator.
yeah.
Because
Yeah.
when you said that, I'm thinking,
Yeah.
didn't gladiators
It was
would
for life,
survive?
yeah,
They don't
yeah.
survive, they
Right.
fight to the death,
Death.
and if they
Yeah.
survive,
That's
they
right.
go back into the lines.
So he was a gladiator who, I mean, it's kind of a ridiculous story. Clever story. So now we're going to come up to 420, which is short but very, very rich. And is the basis of the connection between Yochanan and Resh Lakish, and we'll see where that goes. And we're going to spend some time on this one much shorter story. So this is some of you may have seen or heard this one before. Would you like to continue or some
Well,
more?
let's Nancy have
Nancy,
it.
go ahead.
Okay, what number are we on?
420, 420.
One day, Rabbi Yochanan was bathing in the Jordan when Resh Lakish saw him and jumped into the Jordan after him. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, "Your strength should be devoted to Torah." Resh Lakish replied, "Your beauty should be devoted to women."
So let's stop. So what was happening there? Why did he jump in after him?
There's competition, right? They're,
Well,
or are they
how do you bathe usually?
alone, naked?
So he's bathing naked,
Right.
and maybe he mistook him for, I don't know, but so what, Resh Lakish jumps into the Jordan after him,
Mhm.
Maybe he thought he was drowning.
and so how does he know his strength? He must have grabbed him, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So Resh Lakish grabbed this man he found, and what does Rabbi Yochanan say to him? Your strength, you're so strong, right? You jumped into this river and grabbed me.
Yeah.
Your strength should be devoted to Torah. And Resh Lakish says, your beauty should be devoted to women. Go ahead, Nancy.
Rabbi Yochanan, if you repent, I will let you wed my sister, who is more beautiful than I. And he undertook to repent, but when he tried to jump back and collect his gear, he could not do so. Subsequently, Rabbi Yochanan had him read scripture and study mission, and he became a great leader. But he didn't marry the sister.
He did marry the sister, yeah. So he tried to jump back and collect his gear, right? It says, the mere decision to study Torah so depleted his strength, he was unable to haul his heavy equipment. So what? How does a gladiator become a great rabbi? But
It's like that story we read a few weeks ago, or maybe a month ago, about somebody who wanted to marry a woman and she said he had to go study Torah. He
Right,
went like for 12 years or 11
went 12
years.
years, Rabbi Akiva,
Yeah,
yeah.
Rabbi Akiva, right.
yeah,
That
Right,
seems to
there's-
be a theme.
it's a theme of
About women suffering.
having to be given in marriage to this.
Mhm.
But
You get the prize if you do the work, right?
that's it, right? And the work is always Torah.
Torah.
And so Torah is presented as being as heroic as being a bandit, right?
Right.
But it's an interesting story, right? Rabbi Yochanan, who's this great scholar, and then there's this guy who's this rough gladiator who killed all of his.
Yeah.
This is the story we just read about him. So
Yeah.
very different people, right? But somehow they're linked in this moment. And it's kind of amazing what Resh Lakish does, right? Because Resh Lakish, he's like, okay, right? He's like, I'll try. So it shows he had something in him that he was willing to. And this story is used to say it's never too late to do tshuva, right? To repent, to return, and then to become a great, right?
Right.
But he doesn't wed the sister, so Rabbi Yochanan actually baits and switches.
He does, yeah. It's not. I don't love Rabbi Yochanan, but he's fighting. I'm not sure he's fighting for his life or what, but he's trying to get him off his back. You know?
Yeah.
He's trying to get Resh Lakish off his back, and but he recognizes also that the human being, there's something. It's almost like those movies of people, there's some people who just grew up in circumstances where they turn to a life of crime, but they've got the smarts and they've got the drive to do anything, right? If you just redirect some of that, then they can achieve greatness. And so this is like a version of that. And Resh Lakish has some of the most important teachings in the Talmud. They're not always halachic, but he's in his name. You might have heard this one, but this whole idea that the whole section of the Torah that's talking about the leper, and the lepers, the Mitzorah, and then the rabbis interpret it that the leper is the one who speaks poorly of another person, who does lashon hara about another person. I don't know if you've come across that. That's from Resh Lakish, and anyway, he becomes this really important rabbi, even though he started late.
Does his name mean anything, Resh?
Well, Lakish, I think, is a person, and Resh, I can't remember. I'm not sure, but Resh means first in Aramaic, perhaps. I used to know it, but his real name is Shimon ben Lakish. His real name is Shimon ben Lakish, but he was known as Resh Lakish.
Some type of designation of,
Yeah, I guess maybe he was a gladiator, who knows?
yeah, okay.
And, let's go forward. We've got time. We're now gonna read, and we'll go back if we have time afterwards. Let's go to number 436.
436.
436. Yeah,
You want me to continue reading?
sure, please go ahead.
436, page 284. One day, the sages in the house of study were divided on the following question. At what stage in their manufacture are a sword, a knife, a dagger, a spear, a handsaw, and a scythe deemed to be finished utensils and susceptible to uncleanliness? Finished and, okay. The answer first suggested was when their manufacture is finished. But when is their manufacture finished? Rabbi Yochanan stated after they have been tempered in a furnace. I don't think these people have seen fortune fire. Resh Lakish maintained only after they have been quenched in water. Rabbi Yochanan, a robber is expert in his trade.
So we got what just happened there, right? So they're having a very big argument about a question of halacha, which is basically at what point can something become unclean, susceptible? So that means if a person is not Jewish touches it, the production of all these things, and that part doesn't matter. But just when is it finished? And so Rabbi Yochanan is saying, well, when you're allowed it to cool down, and when it's been finished, tempered in the furnace. I'm not sure I know 100% what that means, tempered in the furnace. But Resh Lakish, he says, no, it's after you put in the water, right? You put in water after it. So Resh Lakish says, well, you should know you're a robber. You used to be a robber, right? That a robber should know his trade. Very, so you go,
That's what he meant.
that a robber is an expert in this trade, right? Because Resh Lakish was once a robber. So he's saying,
And that's how he became a gladiator.
right, so he's
Because
saying,
he was arrested.
he was a robber. So he's saying, oh, well, you should know you were a robber, right? You were, they kind of, what was he doing when he jumped down? And maybe he was going to rob him too, right? So you're saying, well, you should know you're a robber. So go ahead. So Resh Lakish.
Resh Lakish, resentful, replied, what special benefit have you bestowed upon me? There, as a robber, I was called master, and here I am called master. Rabbi Yochanan said, I bestowed upon you the benefit of bringing you under the wings of the presence.
Of the presence.
Of the divine presence, right? They're like he's saying, so what happened here is saying, well, you should know you're a robber. And Resh Lakish is very insulted by it. He says, well, what did you bring me by making me a rabbi? I was a master then, I'm a master now. And he retorts, well, I brought you under God's presence, like, before you were evil, and now I made you. But
So basically what he's saying is that I tempered you.
I tempered you.
Yeah,
and
like
I made you what you are, right? So it got very personal here, right? This is the two friends suddenly are not as, it got very, in the heat of the moment, it got very bad.
Nevertheless, Rabbi Yochanan was mortified by the sharpness of the exchange, while Resh Lakish was so overcome by remorse that he felt ill. Thereopon, his wife came and wept before Rabbi Yochanan.
Right, his Rabbi Yochanan's sister, yeah.
Oh, so he did get
He
married.
did get married to her,
Okay,
yeah.
okay, so there wasn't a baby switch, they did get married. Okay, I take that back. Thereupon, his wife came and wept before her brother, Rabbi Yochanan, pleading, forgive him for the sake of my sons, your nephews. He replied, Scripture says, leave your fatherless children with me, and I will rear them charity. For the sake of my widowhood, then, the brother replied, Scripture said, and let thy widows rely on me, the same place in heaven. Soon after that, Resh Lakish died.
they're very, very sensitive.
Yeah, holy cow.
Very
Apparently,
sensitive, but,
for the sake of my fatherless children.
Rabbi
Rabbi,
Yochanan he was not very nice in that moment, right?
no.
He was really, a closed heart. Go ahead.
Rabbi Yochanan grieved so much for Resh Lakish that he no longer came down to the scholars' assembly, was appealed. And so the sages deliberated, who is to go and ease his mind? Let Rabbi Eliezer ben Pedat, since his knowledge of halachot is acute. Rabbi Eliezer went, sat down before him, and whatever Rabbi Yochanan said, Rabbi Eliezer observed, there is a barata that supports.
So a baraita is a teaching by one of those early rabbis. It's in
There is a
a baraita.
barata.
It means teaching in Aramaic.
Rabbi Yochanan finally exclaimed, do you think you are at all like Ben Lakish? When I would state a matter, Ben Lakish used to raise 24 objections, which I responded to with 24 rebuttals, forming a debate that led to a fuller comprehension of the tradition. But all you say is, there is a single baraita that supports you, as though I do not know on my own that what I said was right. Then Rabbi Yochanan stood up, rent his garments, bursting into tears, cried out, where are you, Ben Lakish? Where are you, Ben Lakish? He kept crying in anguish until he went out of his mind. And then the sages besought mercy in his behalf, and he died.
Terrible story,
Tragic story, right?
very tragic,
But it means they need each other.
yeah.
They really, I mean, it's a
They-
symbiotic.
With a symbiotic, you see they had a special
Connection,
friendship, right?
yeah.
They had a special connection that was so intense, right?
Hmm.
You see from the story of how they met that it was just really,
Yeah.
they
Hmm.
were so connected, but in the heat of the moment, this is a story a little bit about fiery people and friendships and when people don't get along and I mean we've all been through this, right? Where a little moment of somebody says something that's not correct to you, and then you say something not correct back to them, and the feelings. I mean, it's being maybe a little dramatic.
Oh, really?
But these maybe I don't know how to take it. Maybe they lived differently back then, and this was very serious to them. But their rivalry. It's also about the rivalry in the study hall, right? And when you're in the study hall and the arguments were the system they created, which is a system of argument, has its pluses, but the minuses are also that you get there's a lot of ego involved too here, right? There's a lot of ego in their whole thing, and then even Rabbi Yochanan and the guy who comes after him.
But Rabbi Yochanan does not come out of this looking good to me anyway. I
No.
mean.
Well, he
he's
kind
not-
of redeemed himself, Nancy, a little bit when he grieved so much for his
Yes.
friend.
That he died,
Yeah, I mean, he seemed so harsh.
but he caused his friend's death, which is why he was grieving so hard. I mean,
Well, but he felt he was just saying what the Torah said and that he wasn't saying anything wrong. To the wife, anyway.
robber, he called him a
Yeah.
robber.
It's kind of it's a story. It's a sad story, but it's a
It
little bit
is.
about the story about the veneer, and how much happens underneath, right? In everything, right? Even in
Yeah.
all of our friendships and all of our connections, because here they are, they're the best of friends, but suddenly in the heat of the moment, what they really thought about each other came out, and there was no way back,
Exactly,
right? So
right.
it's like there was no. Suddenly this whole time he's been treating Resh Lakish as his beloved partner and rabbi. He's really thought of him as a robber, or is that what he thought of him? But that's what came out. So it's actually very powerful that it's Resh Lakish. It's in his name that some of the most important teachings in the Talmud against speaking ill of another person come from
Yeah.
Resh Lakish.
Mm.
Who
Go
would
ahead.
know?
He would know because he just got and so from this, there's a lot that comes in the Talmud, but there's a whole section of the Talmud that says you should never mention to someone who did tshuva about their previous life. And so just you should never mention to a convert, you used to eat bugs and unkosher foods or whatever. We should never mention to a person who comes from a poor lineage, you come from. So anyway, there's a whole series of teachings are about, show respect, and it doesn't matter where you come from, it's where you are at that moment. And then that's very hurtful. And so what's Resh Lakish said, Resh Lakish spent so much time building up a whole new life, right? He built a whole new life, a new identity. He married, a rabbi's sister.
Right.
He built a whole new life. And finally, the rabbi he trusted and his friend said, "No, you're still a robber." And so his response is pretty great too, right? You say you think, well, he's mortified. But he says, "You think you're so great?
Yeah.
I was a master then. I'm a master now with you, but I was also a master then. And what does it matter? What did I really learn through all of this? You just showed me that you're so to speak, piety in Torah is not worth much, right? That's what he was saying, right? Your Torah is not that.
How much is just appearance and instead of piety if they're dealing with each other that way? They're very more concerned of an egoist. I mean, to me, that doesn't sit well. How can you admire somebody that behaves that way?
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm puzzled about the robber exchange. The story as it's told, it does seem like he's accepting that he was a robber, but the footnote says the verse was quoted proverbially, that it was only later taken to be literal, that he was held to be a robber. If you work that into this, it's hard to make sense. I don't know if they changed the story later and that he wasn't a robber, but apparently a circus clown, or I should say a circus attendant. So I'm very confused about what they're why they put it the way they put it, because it's a very powerful, interesting, and painful story either way, though, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that means. I hadn't read that note. This is quote proverbial. During later times, it was taken literally. Resh Lakish was held to have been a robber. Well, we know he was held to be a gladiator, so it's no stretch of the imagination to go from gladiator to robber.
Well, there were a lot of innocent people who were pressed into gladiatorship too.
But that story of him jumping on an innocent person sounds very much like a robber.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure where the scholarship comes from, or if it's, if it was an apologetic, they didn't want to make Resh Lakish into a robber, and that's for the early commentators, or if it's within the time. I'll have to do a little bit of research on that. That's interesting. Scholarship sometimes goes back and forth.
From my perspective, I see this even in the modern times. That this happens all the times, right? People say things in the heat of the moment out of emotion, whether they mean it or not, and they don't guard their tongues. Thinking, well, am I going to mean this when I'm not feeling the way I'm feeling, or to win an argument or something like this, and you can't take hurtful words back. And so that's one thing I see out of this. The second thing is the fact that Resh Lakish was sorrowful, but never gave his own apology. His wife went and begged on his behalf, but it wasn't from him. And by the same token, Rabbi Yochanan didn't go back and try to rectify that relationship either. And that I see in the modern world, where either because of pride or because people don't know how to mend those relationships, they don't go mend those relationships. And it does kind of beg the question on whether this stuff would have befallen them, their deaths at this point, if they had come together, because obviously they loved each other very, very much.
Beautiful. It's the saying that they died, I think also shows, it's also about the beauty of friendship. You can love someone so much that when their relationship is broken, it can really have that impact on one. You know, if you're completely, this is before I was married or even met Rachel, but there was in rabbinical school, when we were in Israel, there was, we had a weekend, and there was a game that people were playing, which was, who knows you better, your spouse or your study partner in the thing? And so they would, literally, it was a game we played, and so they would ask, you'd ask five questions, you'd ask it to both the study partner and to their spouse, and see who knew him better. And so it was a very funny game. But because when you're in rabbinical school, the thing you spend all day long, you know, talking and the one who was my study partner, you know, you spend a lot of time in intense one-on-one. You're going through this whole process, and we used to always sing before, and it was a whole kind of thing. So it's
So who won the game in your case?
in my case.
Wife or your
Well, I
son?
hadn't met my wife
You
yet.
weren't
I
married.
met my wife my last year of rabbinical
Yeah, you
school
weren't
after
married,
this.
right.
I wasn't married, so I didn't have. But
So you were never the subject. of the
I was never the subject.
Gratefully.
But I think I probably played for him, because I think he just got married, so it was. But there were others, and sometimes the study partner knew more about, you know,
Yeah, I believe
favorite
it.
movie, favorite this, favorite
If
that.
you spend all day
You spend all
together.
day together, so, you know, and sometimes they get married, and it's not like you have all this time together, you say, you know, you're.
Right.
So,
Short engagement.
It's a great
that
game.
kind of thing, yeah. Probably work too if your husband is a doctor, and, you know, who knows better, his colleague at the hospital or the.
Yeah. After more than 40 years, I still, for almost 50 years, I'm still learning new things about my wife.
She's been holding out on you, has she?
No, not holding out. It's just that you never know. A simple thing.
Yeah.
And it was a few years ago, and we happened to be visiting in Costa Rica when they had the World Cup, and the team Costa Rica was there in the finals, and we went into a restaurant, and she said, "I don't like this table." I said, "Why? It seems nice to me." She said, "No, there's a column." I said, "What's a column got to do with it?" "No, it's blocking the TV screen. I want to see the game." I said, "Then the Costa Rica didn't play." "Yes, but I'm fascinated by football, by soccer." It took me 40 years to learn that. Silly. But there could be any number of other things that are more personal, more intimate that, about your marriage partner that you may not know. That's
It's true, it's true.
a strange, circumstance, or an unusual circumstance just happens to evolve. So.
It's after that game stuck in my mind, and I made sure I knew all of Rachel's favorite band, favorite movie. But it is also part of what we've been reading about, which is a devotion of these men to the Torah and to being a rabbi is often in competition to their family lives. And some of these stories are pretty critical of the rabbis for neglect of their family life, and for their neglect of and you know, they might, and critical of them for being very lofty in their intellectual pursuits, but somewhat childish in some of the other areas of their lives, and unable and not being as wise. The fact that it's included is also maybe a commentary on beware. You know, don't be a guy and a genius in Torah. Be an idiot in the rest of your life. To the point of how both the pain you cause a person is put blood on your hands. And so that's a long thing. I'm going to end a little bit early. Actually, no, we're perfectly on time. Next week is Thanksgiving.
Right.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Same to you.
And we'll
Thank you.
start again in 2 weeks, which will be the day of Hanukkah.
Oh.
2 weeks
Yep.
is what?
It will be the eve of Thursday. 2 weeks from now is Hanukkah.
Really, it's early this year.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
It is early.
Oh, no, you're right. Maybe it's the week after that.
No,
No, you're right. It's
It's
the week
not-
after
it's
that.
December, it's December.
You're right. It's 2 weeks.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, it's 3 weeks.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Happy
I
holidays.
learned quite a bit
Of the
Yeah.
seventh.
today.
It's
So
night of
thank you.
December
7th.
Thank the Lord.
Hanukkah.
Thank you. God, it's not coming up that
It
quick.
hasn't been in November since, what was that year?